The metal chair felt cold against Tejo's back as he sat in the white room with his hands locked in heavy chains. The chains were made for beings much larger than humans, but they still held him tight enough that his wrists had red marks from trying to move them earlier. Blood had dried on his knuckles, and a cut above his left eye had stopped bleeding but still hurt when he blinked. His blue uniform shirt was torn in 3 places and stained with things he did not want to think about right now. Across from him stood the strangest creature he had ever seen, and that was saying something after 2 years of flying cargo ships through alien space. High Inquisitor Veltar looked like someone had taken a giant praying mantis and taught it to wear fancy robes. The alien had 4 arms that moved in ways that made Tejo's stomach feel sick, and 2 large eyes that never seemed to blink as they stared at him. The creature's head turned left and right in small jerky movements like it was trying to see him from every angle at once. The room had no windows and only one door that Tejo was sure he could not open, even if his hands were free. White walls stretched up to a white ceiling with lights that were too bright and made everything look like it was covered in clean hospital paint. The floor was some kind of metal that showed his reflection like a dirty mirror. In the center of the room between him and the alien was a table that looked like it could hold the weight of a small car. Veltar made a sound like clicking metal, and suddenly the air above the table began to glow blue. Images formed in the light, showing what looked like security camera footage from different angles. Tejo watched himself on the screens and had to admit that what he saw looked pretty bad from the outside. There he was fighting creatures that were much taller than him and had natural armor that looked like it could stop bullets. The footage showed him moving faster than he remembered moving and hitting harder than he thought he could hit. The alien clicked again and the images changed to show the end of the fight. On screen, Tejo grabbed the arm of one of the big creatures and pulled until something made a wet snapping sound. The creature fell backwards, making a noise like a broken air conditioner, and its arm came off in Tejo's hands. Without thinking about it, he threw the arm across the room where it hit a wall with a sound like dropping a bag of wet sand. Then the screen showed him reaching into his pocket and pulling out a cigar that he lit with something that glowed orange in his hand. Veltar's 4 arms moved in different directions as it spoke in a voice that sounded like grinding glass mixed with bird songs. The words came out wrong because the alien's mouth was not made for human language, but Tejo could understand most of what it was trying to say. The creature wanted to know how a human could do what the footage showed. It wanted to know if humans were some kind of warrior race that had been hiding their true nature from the rest of the galaxy. Tejo looked at the alien and then looked at the footage still playing in the blue light above the table. He tried to explain that he was just a cargo pilot and that he had not wanted to fight anyone. He told Veltar that the big creatures had started the whole thing and that he was just trying to protect himself and his navigator. His Korean accent made the alien words sound even stranger than usual, and he had to repeat himself 3 times before Veltar seemed to understand what he was saying. The alien made more clicking sounds and new footage appeared showing the inside of what looked like a space station. Tejo could see himself and Bora walking through metal corridors carrying boxes and looking like normal people doing normal work. The footage showed them talking to other aliens and smiling and acting friendly. Then it jumped to show the big, armored creatures arriving and everything changing very quickly. Veltar pointed at the screen with one of its 4 hands and asked why a simple cargo pilot would know how to fight like a trained soldier. It wanted to know if all humans could do what Tejo had done or if he was special somehow. The alien's voice got higher and more excited as it talked, and its head movements became more jerky and fast. Tejo thought about how to explain something that seemed obvious to him but was clearly confusing to the alien. He told Veltar that on Earth everyone learned to fight a little bit because the planet was dangerous and you never knew when you might need to defend yourself. He said that he had been in the military for a few years before becoming a pilot, but that most humans had some kind of training like that. The alien's eyes got wider when he said this, and it made more clicking sounds. The footage changed again to show other incidents from different places in space. Tejo saw humans fighting pirates and surviving crashes and doing things that the alien clearly thought were impossible. In one clip, a human woman was fixing a broken ship engine while space debris fell around her like deadly rain. In another, a human man was carrying an injured alien to safety while running through what looked like an exploding building. Veltar asked if humans were the strongest species in the galaxy, and Tejo had to laugh even though his ribs hurt when He did it. He explained that humans were probably not the strongest or the fastest or the smartest, but that they were very good at not giving up when things went wrong. He said that Earth was the kind of place where you learned to keep going, even when everything was trying to kill you or you would not live very long. The alien stopped moving its arms and stared at him for a long time without making any sounds. Finally, it asked what Earth was like and why humans called it a death world. Tejo tried to think of words that would help the alien understand without scaring it too much. He talked about storms that could level cities and animals that hunted, in packs and diseases that could kill millions of people before anyone could stop them. He mentioned earthquakes and volcanoes and winters cold enough to freeze water solid. Veltar made a sound like a broken whistle, and its 4 arms started moving again in ways that looked worried. It asked how many humans lived on such a dangerous planet, and Tejo told it there were billions of them. The alien's head jerked back like someone had hit it, and it made more clicking sounds that seemed faster and more upset than before. The door behind Veltar made a hissing sound and started to open. Tejo could not see who was coming in, but he could hear footsteps that sounded heavy and confident. The alien turned to look at the door, and its arms stopped moving completely. Whatever was about to happen, Tejo had a feeling that his day was about to get much more interesting. 3 days earlier, Tejo had been drinking coffee from a metal cup that was too small for his hands, while Bora checked their flight path to mining station Kepler 7. The coffee tasted like it had been made from burned dirt, but it was hot and had enough caffeine to keep him awake during the long, boring hours of space travel. Their cargo ship was not fancy, but it was reliable, and had carried them safely through dozens of deliveries to stations scattered across this part of the galaxy. Bora sat in the navigator seat looking at screens full of numbers and star charts, while her short black hair caught the light from the control panels. She had been his partner for 8 months now, and was the best navigator he had ever worked with. Before joining his crew, she had been a medic in the Korean Special Forces, but she did not talk about those days very much. All Tejo knew was that she could patch up injuries better than most doctors and could plot a course through an asteroid field without breaking a sweat. The mining station appeared on their screens as a collection of metal boxes connected by tubes and surrounded by the kind of industrial equipment that pulled valuable minerals out of dead rocks floating in space. It was not a pretty sight, but it was exactly what they had expected to see. Administrator Quillix had hired them to bring supplies that the station needed to keep running, and the job paid well enough to make the long trip worth their time. Tejo guided their ship into the station's docking bay, while Bora handled the communication with station control. The process was routine and boring, which was exactly how they liked their jobs to go. Boring meant safe, and safe meant they would get paid and go home without any problems. They had no way of knowing that Administrator Quillix had been doing business with people who were definitely going to be a problem. The docking bay was larger than most they had seen and filled with the kind of heavy machinery used for moving ore and supplies around a mining operation. Their ship looked small next to the giant containers and loading equipment, but there was plenty of room for them to park and unload their cargo. Bora started going through her checklist, while Tejo shut down the engines and prepared to open the cargo bay doors. Administrator Quillix met them at the airlock, and Tejo could see right away that something was making the alien nervous. Quillix looked like a large bird that had learned to walk on 2 legs and wear clothes, but its feathers kept twitching, and its beak clicked in a way that suggested worry. The alien kept looking over its shoulder like it expected someone to sneak up behind it while they talked about the delivery and where to put the supplies. The cargo they were carrying was mostly food and basic equipment that any mining station would need to keep its workers fed and its machines running. Nothing unusual or expensive, and certainly nothing that should make an administrator act like it was afraid of its own shadow. Tejo and Bora exchanged looks, but did not say anything about the alien's strange behavior. Sometimes it was better not to ask questions about why clients acted weird as long as they paid their bills. They were halfway through unloading the cargo when the station's alarms started making loud noises that echoed through the metal corridors. Quillix made a sound like a scared chicken, and its feathers stood up in all directions while it ran toward the control room without explaining what was happening. Bora immediately reached for the medical kit she always carried, while Tejo looked around for whatever was causing the alarm to sound. The answer came in the form of 3 ships that were much larger and more heavily armed than anything that should have been visiting a simple mining station. The ships docked at the far end of the bay with the kind of aggressive precision that suggested their crews were used to taking what they wanted instead of asking nicely for it. Tejo felt his stomach sink as he realized they had walked into the middle of something that was going to be very bad for everyone involved. The airlocks on the 3 ships opened at the same time, and out came creatures that looked like they had been designed by someone who thought regular nightmares were not scary enough. The Kethrak stood almost 9 feet tall on legs that ended in claws sharp enough to cut through metal. Their bodies were covered in natural armor that looked like it could stop bullets, and their arms ended in hands that had too many fingers, with edges like razor blades. The leader of the group was even bigger than the others and had scars across its face that suggested it had survived fights that would have killed most other beings. War Chief Thokmar moved with the kind of confidence that came from knowing it could tear apart anything that got in its way. The other Kethrak followed behind it like soldiers who were used to following orders and enjoyed their work a little too much. Tai-Ho grabbed Bora's arm and tried to move toward their ship, but it was too late because the Kethrak had already seen them and were clearly interested in what they had found. The aliens made sounds like metal being dragged across stone as they talked to each other and pointed at the 2 humans with claws that glinted under the station's lights. Tai-Ho did not need to understand their language to know they were discussing whether humans would be fun to play with. Thokmar approached them with the kind of slow, confident walk that predators used when they knew their prey had nowhere to run. It spoke in broken Galactic Standard with a voice that sounded like gravel being poured into a metal bucket. The alien wanted to know what humans were doing so far from their death world, and whether they were as soft and weak as most species thought they were. Bora stepped slightly forward and tried to explain that they were just cargo pilots making a delivery, and had no interest in causing trouble for anyone. She used her calmest voice and kept her hands visible to show that she was not carrying any weapons. It was exactly the right way to handle the situation, if they had been dealing with reasonable beings who could be talked out of violence. Unfortunately, the Kethrak were not reasonable, and had not come to the station to have conversations. Thokmar laughed at Bora's attempt at diplomacy, and told its warriors that humans were supposed to be from a dangerous planet, but looked like they would break if someone squeezed them too hard. The alien suggested they should test this theory by seeing how much pressure a human could take before it stopped moving. The other Kethrak made excited sounds and started moving closer while flexing their claws in ways that left no doubt about what they wanted to do. Tejo looked around the docking bay for anything that could be used as a weapon or a way to escape, but there was nothing helpful within reach. Their ship was too far away, and the station's security had apparently decided to let the Kethrak do whatever they wanted without interference. Thokmar announced that it would be entertaining to watch humans try to fight creatures that were clearly superior in every way. It suggested they could have a combat demonstration right there in the docking bay, where everyone could watch and learn why the Kethrak were feared throughout the galaxy. The alien seemed to think this was a generous offer since it would give the humans a chance to die with some dignity, instead of just being torn apart without warning. Tejo set down his coffee cup carefully on top of a nearby crate and looked at the group of Kethrak warriors surrounding them. He thought about Bora, and how she had trusted him to keep them both safe during their cargo runs. He thought about his family back on Earth, and how they would never know what happened to him if he died in this ugly metal room so far from home. Then he thought about how much he hated bullies who thought they could hurt people just because they were bigger and stronger. He told Thokmar in his heavily accented Galactic Standard that he accepted the challenge, but wanted to make sure Bora would be left alone regardless of what happened to him. The alien agreed with the kind of casual indifference of someone who did not think the outcome was in any doubt. It ordered its warriors to form a circle around the combat area, while station workers gathered to watch what they assumed would be a very short and very bloody show. The cargo bay became silent except for the hum of station machinery and the sound of alien breathing as everyone waited to see what would happen next. Tejo stood in the center of the space surrounded by creatures that towered over him like armored giants while Bora watched from behind a cargo container with her medical kit, ready for what she was sure would be a very bad outcome. The station workers pressed against walls and peered around equipment to get a better view of what they expected would be over very quickly. Thokmar gestured with one clawed hand for its warriors to give the human some room to move around before they killed him. The alien wanted this to be entertaining rather than just efficient, and thought it would be more fun if the human had enough space to run around and be scared before the inevitable end. 3 other Kethrak moved to form a loose circle around Tejo while making sounds like metal scraping against stone that might have been laughter. The human looked small and fragile standing there in his torn blue shirt, with blood still dried on his knuckles from the chains in the interrogation room that had not happened yet. His black hair was messy, and his face showed the kind of tiredness that came from too many long flights through space. But his eyes were calm as he studied the aliens surrounding him. He moved his shoulders slightly to loosen muscles that had gotten stiff from sitting in the pilot chair for too many hours. The first Kethrak warrior stepped forward with claws extended and confidence written in every movement of its armored body. It was not the largest of the group, but it was still twice as tall as Tejo, and covered in natural protection that had evolved over millions of years to keep its species alive in whatever hell world had created them. The alien moved slowly because it wanted to savor the fear it expected to see in the human's eyes. Instead, Tejo stepped to his left and grabbed a piece of metal pipe that was lying on the floor next to some mining equipment. The pipe was about 3 feet long and heavy enough to dent normal metal, but probably not heavy enough to get through Kethrak armor. He held it like a club and waited for the alien to come close enough to hit. His breathing was steady, and his stance looked like someone who had been in fights before and knew how to stay balanced. The Kethrak lunged forward with claws aimed at the human's chest, expecting to end the fight with one quick strike. Tejo moved faster than any of the watching aliens thought was possible, and brought the pipe around in an arc that caught the warrior in the side of its head just above where its natural armor was thinnest. The sound of metal hitting chitin echoed through the cargo bay like a gunshot, and the Kethrak stumbled sideways, making a noise like a broken engine. The alien crowd made surprise sounds because they had expected to see the human torn apart in seconds, not watch him actually hurt one of the most feared warriors in the galaxy. Thokmar's eyes narrowed as it realized this might be more interesting than it had thought. The wounded Kethrak shook its head and turned back toward Tejo with fury replacing its earlier confidence. What happened next was not the kind of elegant combat that appeared in movies or the brutal but organized fighting that military trainers taught in schools. This was desperate, ugly violence between a human who knew he was going to die if he made any mistakes, and aliens who had suddenly discovered that their prey had teeth. Tejo used everything in the cargo bay that could be turned into a weapon, or an advantage, while the Kethrak tried to corner him with claws and superior strength. He threw shipping containers to block their movements and climbed on top of machinery to stay out of reach of their claws. When one warrior jumped up to follow him, Tejo kicked it in the face hard enough to break something that made a wet crunching sound. The low gravity of the station meant he could move in ways that would have been impossible on Earth, and hit with force that surprised even him when his attacks connected with alien flesh. The second Kethrak managed to grab him around the waist, with arms that felt like metal cables, but Tejo twisted in ways that human spines were designed to handle and got his hands around the alien's neck. He squeezed with fingers that had been strengthened by years of manual labor and gravity that was heavier than anything these creatures had evolved to handle. The warrior made choking sounds and tried to shake him off, but could not get the leverage it needed. Blood started flowing from cuts on Tejo's arms and back where Kethrak claws had found their mark, but he ignored the pain, because stopping to think about injuries was a luxury he could not afford. On Earth, pain was information that helped you avoid death but did not prevent you from doing what needed to be done. He had learned this lesson during military training and reinforced it during years of working in environments that could kill careless people. The third warrior tried to attack while Tejo was grappling with the second one, but the human saw it coming and used the alien he was holding as a shield. Kethrak claws designed to tear through human flesh worked just as well on Kethrak armor, and the warrior accidentally wounded its own companion while trying to reach the human. The injured alien screamed in a voice like tearing metal and fell backward, taking Tejo with it. They hit the floor hard enough to shake the metal plates under their feet, and Tejo rolled away before the wounded Kethrak could grab him again. His shirt was now completely torn, and blood was running down his face from a cut above his eye, but he was still moving and still fighting. The alien he had used as a shield was bleeding from deep gashes in its side and making sounds like a dying machine. Thokmar decided it was time to join the fight personally, because its warriors were clearly not handling this human as easily as expected. The war chief moved with the kind of speed and precision that came from thousands of battles against opponents, who were supposed to be much more dangerous than one small human. Its claws gleamed in the station lights as it approached Tejo with movements that looked like death itself had learned to walk. The human backed away from the approaching war chief while looking around for anything that could help him survive the next few minutes. His improvised weapons were scattered around the cargo bay, and most of them were broken or out of reach. Bora was still hidden behind the cargo container, but he could see her moving closer with something in her hands that might have been a medical laser, or might have been something more useful. Thokmar spoke in its grinding voice about how impressed it was that a human had lasted this long against Kethrak warriors, but explained that the demonstration was over, and it was time for the human to die properly. The alien flexed claws that were longer than Tejo's fingers and sharp enough to cut through the station's metal walls. It moved forward with the confidence of a predator that had never met anything it could not kill. Tejo feinted to the left, and then threw himself to the right in a move that brought him close to a piece of mining equipment with hydraulic arms designed to lift containers that weighed several tons. He grabbed one of the hydraulic lines and yanked it loose in a spray of fluid that made the machinery start making angry beeping sounds. The line whipped around under pressure like an industrial snake while hydraulic fluid sprayed everywhere, making the floor slippery and dangerous. The war chief slipped on the fluid and stumbled just long enough for Tejo to grab its extended arm and use leverage and desperation to do something that should have been impossible. Human muscles that had evolved to handle Earth's gravity and human bones that had been strengthened by a lifetime of heavy work, combined with adrenaline and the kind of determination that only came from knowing you were about to die. There was a sound like breaking branches mixed with tearing fabric as Thokmar's arm separated from its shoulder in ways that Kethrak anatomy was definitely not designed to handle. The war chief made a noise like a steam engine exploding as green blood sprayed across the cargo bay floor. Tejo found himself holding an alien arm that was still twitching and weighed more than he had expected. Without thinking about it, he threw the arm across the bay where it hit the wall with a wet slapping sound and left a stain that would probably never come out. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the cigar his grandfather had given him before his first trip into space. He found his lighter and lit the cigar while standing over the wounded war chief who was trying to stop the bleeding from its missing arm. The cargo bay was completely silent except for the sound of injured Kethrak breathing and the quiet hum of station machinery. Everyone watched as Tejo took a long drag from his cigar and blew smoke toward the ceiling, while looking like someone who had just finished a normal day's work, instead of fighting for his life against aliens that were supposed to be unstoppable. The door to the interrogation room hissed open and Captain Hyojin walked in, wearing the dark blue uniform of the Earth Defense Corps with the kind of confident stride that suggested she was used to being the most dangerous person in any room she entered. She was shorter than Tejo, but carried herself like someone who had spent years learning how to kill people efficiently and had gotten very good at her job. Her black hair was pulled back in a regulation style that did nothing to soften the sharp angles of her face or the cold calculation in her dark eyes. Feltar made clicking sounds of surprise and took a step backward as the human woman approached the table without showing any sign of being impressed by the alien's size or authority. High Inquisitor was supposed to be one of the most important positions in the Galactic Council hierarchy, but Hyojin looked at the mantis-like creature like it was just another obstacle that needed to be moved out of her way. She carried a briefcase in one hand and had the kind of relaxed alertness that made smart people nervous. She set the briefcase on the metal table with a sound that seemed much louder than it should have been in the quiet room and looked at Tejo with the expression of someone examining a piece of equipment that had caused problems. The cargo pilot gave her a tired smile and made a comment in Korean that sounded like he was apologizing for making her come all this way to pick him up. She responded in the same language with words that were probably not compliments about his decision-making skills. Feltar clicked frantically and demanded to know who this new human was, and what authority she had to interrupt an official Galactic Council investigation. Hyojin turned to look at the alien with the kind of cold attention that suggested she was calculating exactly how long it would take to kill it if that became necessary. She spoke in perfect Galactic Standard without any accent and explained that she was Captain Hyojin of the Earth Defense Corps, and she had come to retrieve a citizen who had been detained without proper legal justification. The alien's forearms began moving in agitated patterns as it tried to explain that Taeho was being held as a material witness in an investigation of violence that had resulted in serious injuries to multiple Galactic Council citizens. Hyojin opened her briefcase and pulled out what looked like an official document covered in seals and signatures that meant it was the kind of paperwork that could cause problems for people who ignored it. She placed the document on the table and informed Veltar that Earth was formally requesting the immediate release of its citizen. While the alien examined the paperwork with obvious confusion, Hyojin activated a small device that projected holographic images into the air above the table. The images showed incidents from across the galaxy where humans had been involved in, situations that other species found difficult to understand. There was footage of human miners continuing to work during what other species would consider catastrophic equipment failures. There were clips of human traders negotiating deals while their ships were being shot at by pirates who had made the mistake of thinking humans would be easy targets. One particularly impressive piece of footage showed a human engineer named Gitai, who had kept a space station's life support systems running during a reactor meltdown that should have killed everyone aboard. The engineer had worked for 18 hours straight in radiation levels that would have been fatal to most galactic species while the station was being evacuated. When rescue ships finally arrived, they found him unconscious at his post but still alive and the life support systems still functioning perfectly. Veltar made sounds like grinding metal as it tried to process what it was seeing, while Hyojin calmly explained that these were not unusual examples of human behavior, but rather typical incidents that happened whenever humans traveled through space. She pointed out that most species in the galaxy had evolved on worlds that were relatively safe and stable compared to Earth, which had spent billions of years trying to kill everything that lived on it. Humans had survived by becoming very good at not dying even when circumstances suggested they should. The captain activated another set of images that showed Earth itself, and Veltar's reaction suggested that the alien was having trouble believing what it was seeing. There were videos of human cities that continued to function normally during weather events that would have been considered natural disasters on most other worlds. Hurricanes with winds strong enough to tear apart buildings were treated as minor inconveniences that people prepared for by boarding up their windows and stocking up on supplies. Earthquakes that could level mountains were handled with building codes and emergency procedures that assumed such things would happen regularly. One particularly educational video showed a group of Korean children walking to school through snow that was falling so heavily that visibility was reduced to a few feet, while the temperature was cold enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes. The children were dressed appropriately for the weather and seemed to consider this a normal Tuesday morning. Veltar made noises like a broken whistle as it tried to understand how any species could consider such conditions routine. Hyojin explained that Earth's gravity was almost 3 times stronger than the galactic standard, which meant that human bones and muscles developed under constant pressure that would crush most alien species. Earth's atmosphere contained oxygen at concentrations that were toxic to many galactic citizens, and the planet's weather patterns included storms that generated more energy than some civilizations used in a year. Humans had adapted to all of this by becoming ridiculously durable, compared to species that had evolved in safer environments. She opened another file that contained medical data comparing human physiology to galactic averages, and the numbers were shocking enough to make Veltar's arms stop moving completely. Human bone density was more than 4 times the galactic average, while human muscle fiber efficiency was so far above normal that it fell outside the standard measurement scales. Human pain tolerance levels were classified as impossible by medical experts who had never encountered a species that could function normally with injuries that would incapacitate most other beings. The most disturbing piece of information was the data on human blood chemistry, which showed that Earth natives could carry oxygen so efficiently through their circulatory systems that they could survive in atmospheric conditions that would kill most aliens through oxygen poisoning. Their hearts pumped blood at pressures that would burst the vessels of species adapted to lighter gravity, while their brains processed information at speeds that suggested they had evolved to make life or death decisions much faster than should have been necessary. Veltar asked in a voice that sounded smaller than before, whether all humans possessed these capabilities or if Taeho was some kind of enhanced warrior that had been specially trained for combat. Hyojin looked at the cargo pilot, who was still chained to his chair, and made a sound that might have been laughter if it had been warmer. She explained that Taiho was completely typical for his species and had received only standard military training before becoming a civilian pilot. Most humans went through some form of combat preparation because Earth was the kind of place where you needed to know how to defend yourself or you would not live long enough to reproduce. The alien's forearms began moving again, but more slowly than before, as it processed information that challenged everything it thought it knew about the galaxy's newest spacefaring species. Hyo-jin continued her explanation by pointing out that humans had not been trying to hide their capabilities but had simply not realized that other species would find them unusual. From a human perspective, the ability to survive in hostile environments and fight when necessary were basic life skills that everyone learned as children. She activated one more hologram that showed Ambassador Sujin addressing the Galactic Council with a presentation about Earth's interest in peaceful trade and exploration. The ambassador looked professional and diplomatic as she explained humanity's desire to join the galactic community as partners rather than conquerors. What the alien dignitaries watching had not understood was that they were looking at a species that treated survival challenges as routine problems and considered warfare to be just another skill that people picked up when they needed it. Veltar made clicking sounds that suggested it was beginning to understand the implications of what it had learned, and asked whether the Galactic Council should be concerned about humans becoming a threat to other species. Hyo-jin shook her head and explained that humans were generally peaceful and preferred to avoid conflict when possible, but pointed out that this preference came from a position of strength rather than weakness. Earth citizens had learned that violence was expensive and inefficient, but they had also learned how to be very good at it when circumstances left them no other choice. She began gathering her documents while explaining that similar incidents had been reported throughout human space wherever other species had made the mistake of underestimating what they assumed was a primitive and harmless species. Pirates had learned to avoid ships with Earth registry markings after several encounters had ended very badly for the pirates. Slave traders had stopped targeting human colonies after rescue missions had resulted in more dead slavers than rescued slaves. 2 weeks later, the Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from hundreds of species gathered to discuss what everyone was calling the human question. The massive chamber stretched upward into shadows with seating arranged in concentric circles around a central platform where speakers addressed the assembly. Translator devices hummed and clicked as they converted dozens of different languages into something that could be understood by beings whose vocal cords had evolved in completely different ways. Ambassador Sujin stood at the speaker's podium, wearing a simple gray suit that made her look professional and unthreatening compared to the elaborate robes and ceremonial armor worn by many of the other delegates. She was a small woman with graying hair and the kind of calm confidence that came from years of diplomatic experience, but the assembled aliens looked at her with the wariness usually reserved for dangerous predators. Word had spread quickly about what had happened on mining station Kepler-7, and everyone wanted to understand what it meant for the future of galactic civilization. The Velnari delegation sat in the front row, looking like nervous birds with their feathered heads turning constantly to watch for threats that might be approaching from any direction. Their representative counselor Ziff had spent the last week reading reports about human capabilities and was clearly struggling to process information that challenged everything his species thought they knew about biological possibilities. The Velnari had evolved on a world with light gravity and gentle weather, where the most dangerous predators were small creatures that could be avoided by flying to higher branches. Behind them, the Kethrak delegation sat in heavily reinforced chairs designed to support their armored bodies, while their leader, War Chief Groktar, made grinding sounds that suggested he was not entirely pleased with recent developments. 3 of his best warriors were still recovering from injuries sustained during what was supposed to have been a simple intimidation exercise, and the entire Kethrak military hierarchy was having to reconsider their assumptions about prey species and predator relationships. Ambassador Sujin began her presentation by thanking the Assembly for allowing Earth to address concerns that had arisen about human activities in galactic space. She explained that humanity had not intended to cause alarm, and had simply been trying to conduct normal business while learning to navigate the complex social and political structures of galactic civilization. Her voice was calm and reasonable as she spoke, But everyone in the chamber could feel the underlying strength that suggested she was not someone who could be easily intimidated or deceived. She activated a holographic display that showed Earth from orbit and explained that humans called their homeworld a Deathworld, not because they enjoyed living dangerously, but because danger was simply a normal part of existence there. The planet's weather systems generated storms with more destructive power than most species used for their entire industrial output, while its geological activity regularly reshaped continents and eliminated species that were not adaptable enough to survive constant change. The display shifted to show human cities built in locations that most galactic species would consider uninhabitable, and Su-Jin pointed out that humans had learned to thrive in environments that would kill most other beings within hours of exposure. Desert cities existed in temperatures that could melt some alien metals, while Arctic settlements functioned normally in cold that would freeze most galactic atmospheres solid. Coastal communities built elaborate flood control systems because they expected their homes to be hit by massive storms on a regular basis. Counselor Ziff made chirping sounds of distress and asked whether humans enjoyed living in such dangerous conditions or if they were forced to endure them by some external threat. Su-Jin smiled in a way that was probably meant to be reassuring, but had the opposite effect on most of the watching aliens. She explained that humans had simply adapted to their environment over millions of years and now considered these conditions normal. What other species saw as deadly hazards, humans experienced as routine challenges that required appropriate preparation and response. The hologram changed to show human children participating in activities that made several alien delegates make sounds of alarm. There were images of young humans learning to swim in water that was deep enough to drown them and climbing on structures that were high enough to cause serious injury if they fell. Korean children were shown practicing martial arts that involved deliberately hitting each other, while American children played games that required them to run into each other at high speed while wearing minimal protective equipment. War Chief Groktar made grinding sounds that might have been laughter and commented that human cubs were apparently trained for combat from an early age, which explained why adult humans were so difficult to kill. Su-Jin corrected this misunderstanding by explaining that these activities were considered normal childhood development rather than military training. Human children learned physical skills and risk assessment through play that helped them survive to adulthood in an environment that was constantly trying to eliminate careless individuals. The ambassador activated another set of images that showed human emergency response systems dealing with disasters that would have ended most galactic civilizations. Rescue workers moved through collapsed buildings looking for survivors, while volcanic eruptions destroyed entire regions in the background. Medical teams treated injured humans who continued to function normally, despite wounds that would have been fatal to most alien species. Construction crews rebuilt cities that had been flattened by earthquakes while planning for the next disaster that everyone knew was coming eventually. A delegate from the crystalline Shardaki species asked in a voice like ringing glass whether humans were incapable of fear or had simply evolved beyond the need for self-preservation instincts. Su-Jin explained that humans experienced fear like any other intelligent species, but had learned to function effectively despite being afraid. Because stopping to analyze dangers often meant dying before you could find a solution, human brains had evolved to make quick decisions under stress, and human bodies had developed the ability to continue operating even when damaged. The most disturbing part of the presentation came when Su-Jin showed comparative data about human physical capabilities measured against galactic standards. The numbers were so far outside normal ranges that several delegates questioned whether the measurements were accurate or if humans were using some kind of technological enhancement. She assured them that the data had been verified by multiple independent sources and represented the baseline capabilities of unmodified humans who had received only normal education and training. Veltar attended the session remotely through a holographic projection and made clicking sounds as it confirmed that everything in the presentation matched what it had observed during its interrogation of the human cargo pilot. The High Inquisitor added that subsequent investigation had revealed dozens of similar incidents where humans had demonstrated capabilities that seemed impossible, according to established biological principles. In every case, the humans involved had claimed they were just doing what was necessary to survive or protect others. The debate that followed lasted for hours, as delegates tried to understand what humanity's presence in galactic space would mean for everyone else. Some species wanted to quarantine Earth to prevent humans from spreading throughout the galaxy, while others suggested recruiting humans as mercenaries or peacekeepers. A few delegates proposed making humanity a protectorate species that would be carefully monitored and controlled to prevent them from becoming too powerful. Ambassador Sujin listened to all of these suggestions with the kind of patient attention that suggested she had expected such reactions and had prepared responses for each of them. When the debate finally ended, she stood again at the podium and explained that humanity had no interest in conquering the galaxy or imposing their will on other species. Humans simply wanted to trade and explore and learn about the vast universe they had recently discovered was full of intelligent life. She pointed out that humans had already proven they could be peaceful neighbors by establishing successful trade, relationships with dozens of species, and helping with disaster relief efforts on multiple worlds. The same capabilities that made humans effective in combat also made them valuable partners for dangerous projects that required beings who could work in hostile environments or handle emergency situations that would overwhelm normal response team. The session ended without any formal decisions being made, but everyone understood that the galaxy had changed in ways that would take time to fully comprehend. As delegates filed out of the chamber, they spoke in hushed tones about the implications of sharing space with a species that treated survival as a casual skill and considered warfare to be just another tool for solving problems. Meanwhile, Teho and Bora were back to making cargo runs throughout human space, but they had noticed that other ships gave them more room when docking, and alien customs officials processed their paperwork much faster than before. Pirate, even M,